Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me on this special Soul Series webinar called Sunset of the Soul, Overcoming the Terror of Death. How many of you remember last year at this time when you were outside staring up at the sun, you had your special eclipse glasses on, you had searched Amazon for week after weeks to get a special pair of those glasses that were promised to let us be able to look up at the sun and look at that eclipse without doing any damage to our eyes? I remember that day really well because I was actually at a CPR class and we took a break from doing chest compressions on our dummy to head outside and put on glasses and look up at the sun. Our topic today is Overcoming the Terror of Death, and it's going to be based upon a book by Irvin Yalom called Staring at the Sun. And the goal is to understand that there are a lot of people that we work alongside of, that we care deeply about, who are really riddled with this fear of death. They're afraid of their own mortality. You can only look so far as the anti-aging world, the monies that are expended on spa treatments and Botoxes and having this lifted and that fixed and that tucked and that nipped, and you can even see it in the world of the professional bodybuilding, the professional health nuts out there that are going to be doing Ironman triathlons until they're 85. And if you get to that, you can either do those things with the motivation of, you know what, I'm just excited to live in a healthy manner. I've only got one life to live, so I'm going to give it my best shot. Or some of these folks, if they were being honest, they'd say they're doing this out of an underlying fear, underlying battle that they're waging in terms of trying to push back their own mortality. And so today in our webinar, I want to focus on how do we help folks who are literally scared to death. This world is filled with people who are literally scared to death, and they may not even realize it. And you may not even realize that you're as well struggling with some of these same fears. So we're going to dive into the presentation today. I hope you have your eclipse glasses ready because we're going to start staring at the sun. I'm going to share my screen so that you all will have access to see it, and I look forward to your responses and feedback after we're all done. Thanks so much for joining me, and this is going to be our webinar of Sunset of the Soul, Overcoming the Terror of Death. So here we go. This is Sunset of the Soul, Overcoming the Terror of Death, based upon the book Staring at the Sun by Dr. Irvin Yalom. You know what? This is the type of subject that you just gotta wear your shades. It's just like last year when we were looking up at the sun and we all had to have those big, thick glasses on. Staring at the tension between life and death is much like staring at the sun. It's extremely difficult. No one likes to do it. No one, everyone's curious about it, but if we don't do it in a way that takes some significant precaution or does it in a helpful manner, it just is going to cause lots of difficulty. So I hope you've got your sunshades ready as we take a look at this. Yalom says it's not easy to live every moment wholly aware of death. It's like trying to stare at the sun in the face. You can stand only so much of it. Our goals for this training are very straightforward. We want to help you understand what death anxiety is as it relates to the overall concept of existential anxiety. We want to differentiate between overt or on the surface and covert below the surface anxiety. And then we want to evaluate the benefit of how confronting death anxiety relates to life transformation. And finally, we want to identify approaches to assist someone who might be struggling with their own mortality. If you haven't noticed, folks, we live in a really scared to death world. Fears, anxieties, worries, it's just everywhere. Everyone's got fears, everyone's got anxieties, everyone's got worries. It seems like we just carry them around sometimes, even like a badge of honor. And in Yalom's world, he would say that if you put out an good old-fashioned kind of teeter-totter, or you put out an old balancing scale, and on one side of the scale, if you put life, and on the other side of the scale you'd put death, there's a tension between those two. And sometimes our fear of death leads us to overemphasize the balance of life, and other times our unwillingness to live life to the fullest pushes down the side of death even more, and we get more and more into the world of being scared to death. There's also the balance and existential distresses of meaning versus meaninglessness, having purpose in your life or no purpose in your life, having community and fellowship and friends versus feeling isolated and all alone. Each of those tensions are balanced one side to the other, and that's what existential anxiety is really all about, and death anxiety in particular is just one of those balancing tensions that a lot of us struggle with, a lot of us deal with. Yalom, his theory is that anxiety about nothing is really anxiety about death. Could death anxiety really be an underlying issue for a lot of people? And we don't make light of how many people are struggling. Mental health, stress, strain in this fast-paced world, it's a real problem, and we don't make light of it. And it could be that there's a biological or a chemical trouble. Could be just the stress and the pace of life is getting someone down or causing someone to have extra anxiety or worries in their life. Or it could be that maybe Yalom's onto something, that really there's a lot of us that are just literally scared to death. It's like climbing up that roller coaster and you hear it making that clicking noise, click, 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 as you get higher and higher. And you just know it's going to unhinge and you're going to send flying down. And it can raise this underlying anxiety and worry. Am I going to be all right? Am I going to make it? Are we going to be okay? Is this thing strong enough to hold all of us? So death anxiety can either be something very clear on the surface, kind of like I can see the top of the roller coaster, I can see I'm headed down, and I know what I'm afraid of, versus something just kind of underneath, lurking underneath, that might cause a person not even to get on the roller coaster to start with. Yalom would go back to the ancient philosophers, go back to ancient Greek philosophy for a number of his theories, and one of his favorite philosophers was a man by the name of Epicurus, and he would propose that the root cause of all underlying human misery is this underlying fear of death, or this unwillingness to confront our own mortality. And some of the covert examples that Yalom would use, he's not a person of any sort of religious or spiritual belief perspective. So he would say any belief in a God or a higher power or divine being, whether it's in a pantheistic or a monotheistic viewpoint, is merely just a human construct that tries to come up with this afterlife or this being that we're here to please, just because we don't want to stare at the sun. We don't want to look at that reality that there is nothing after death. And that's what Yalom would propose. Yalom would also propose that a lot of death humor, a lot of the daredevils in this life, those people that like to jump out of things and climb things and race things and play chicken in the center of a 4-lane highway, that they're so afraid of their own mortality that they search after these hair-raising adventures just to feel alive. And there's also people who really find themselves constantly bouncing between one relationship savior to another relationship savior. And they're just not even comfortable in their own skin. They're not even able to be independent in any way. They've constantly got to seek out someone to be a savior for them, because they just don't feel like they can handle this underlying anxiety without someone saving them, rescuing them. And yet, just like what we learned from looking at the eclipse, is that there's a great potential to enrich all of our lives if we would just take the time to put on some eclipse glasses and really look intently at our own life, look intently at our own mortality, look at our views, our values, our beliefs that surround this life versus death tension. Yalom talks about certain experiences in life as awakening experience, things that happen to all of us at some point in our journey, and how we can use these to kind of wake up to being aware of these anxieties, aware of these feelings that are within us, and seeing that these also have the great potential for life transformation. So the first one is going through a loss or a crisis. It might be a child who experiences their first death, which might be a pet. It might be a crisis, such as a traumatic, violent event like a car accident, a house fire. It might be a crisis like losing your job. It might be a crisis of, the stock market crashed and you lost, half of your 401k overnight, and that's a crisis. It causes us to awaken. It causes us to wrestle very much so with those underlying fears and worries. I had a woman one time who told me she had a dream about drowning. And you see, she was in her mid-40s, had already survived a bout with cancer, but the cancer treatment and the radiation treatment had fried her lungs to the point where she only had 10% lung capacity. And so her life expectancy was extremely short. And she would talk to me about these fears, these worries that came up, a fear of drowning, a fear of not being able to catch her breath, and how, as we explored those, they were most likely related to this wrestling of life versus death, knowing that her time was limited, that she was staring at the sun, and she was really had some work that she wanted to talk about. She had some experiences that she wanted to explore. Finally, not all of these experiences have to be bad. Sometimes they're positive experiences. The birth of a child, a marriage, a promotion, a moving into a new home, a new neighborhood. Those are all very positive things, but sometimes they can also awaken us to this inner worry that can come along. And if we're not able to tap into what that worry is about, it could be that we're facing our own fear of, oh, do I have what it takes? Am I going to make it? Am I going to make it through this, next phase in life? I don't want to die. I just got married. I want to live with my beautiful husband, my beautiful wife for a long time. So these awakening experiences are much like our friend Ebenezer Scrooge in Dickens' A Christmas Carol. He's visited by the three spirits, the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmas past, and the ghost of Christmases yet to come. And with the ghost of Christmas yet to come, he's taken ahead to years and years ahead, and he's taken to the graveyard where he's able to literally trace his name that's etched in stone on his own tombstone. And he realizes his own mortality has been causing him to try to build an empire on his own, trying to build this empire that if he was just distracted enough, if he was just focused and determined enough to build this empire, he wouldn't have to look at his own soul. He wouldn't have to stare at the sun of his own existence and realize that he was all alone. He had not cultivated any meaningful relationships. He had not stared his mortality in the face and realized that there was a need to accept it in order to truly move forward in life. And he came to that realization through that awakening experience. And instead of being further depressed or further Scrooged or become an even bigger curmudgeon, he has this awakening experience, and his life is completely transformed because he took advantage of that dream. He took advantage of that experience, that awakening experience. And it was like slipping on those eclipse glasses and looking at his life and looking at what had happened and choosing to not live anymore with any regrets. For Yalom, he worked with a lot of terminally ill people, and one cancer patient said to him, "What a pity. I had to wait until now that my body was riddled with cancer to learn how to live." So how do we help someone who might be struggling with this, always searching for the fountain of youth, never willing to look at the tough issues that are struggling within their heart and soul? What do we do with that? What do we do with people who seem to have this daredevil mentality that they're going to live forever and ever and ever? Well, sometimes we have to realize that we have to let them know, reassure them that staring at your own mortality, looking at your own life and death, it's going to raise a lot of anxiety, but look at the richness of life that it will also raise, like that cancer patient. Look at the self-awareness that you'll gain from looking at your own life this way. Yalom would also ask people the question, what is it about death that you're afraid of? And he'd also ask them, what can you do now to live without any more regrets, to live without continuing to accumulate regrets? Some people accumulate regrets like a hoarder accumulates trash in their home. They just continue to accumulate. I regret that I wore the yellow sweater. I regret that I sped to work. I regret that I didn't buy my boss a cup of coffee. I regret that I didn't talk to that man. I regret that I didn't call my mother. I regret that I didn't brush my teeth as much as I should have, and now I have a cavity. You can either choose to live in those regrets, or you can choose to live in a way that you will no longer accumulate regret. And so Yalom would help someone focus on that and say, what can we do to move forward without regret? So how do we help these people overcome their fear, overcome this? And even times they may not even agree with you or may not feel like it has anything to do with a fear of death. But I think that anyone who is feeling stuck, who's feeling lost, who's feeling like life just isn't making a lot of sense right now, I think any of this can be helpful for them in terms of getting unstuck and moving forward. So the first thing to help someone is to talk to them about rippling. Just like when you look at a clear, still piece of water like a pond or a puddle after it's rained, and you drop a tiny little pebble into the middle of that body of water, you see the concentric circles continue to go out and out and out and out and keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the idea is that each of our individual lives are like a tiny pebble dropped into a great big wide ocean. And yet even a tiny little pebble can leave a great big legacy. And that legacy is the influence that we've been able to leave in this world. So maybe if you're a teacher or a counselor or a mentor to at-risk kids, you've had that experience where someone comes up to you later on and finds you in the grocery store and thanks you and says, thank you so much for all that you did for me. That's letting you know that your life rippled into theirs. Encouraging people to contribute their life to something meaningful, like a cause, like a volunteer opportunity. Sometimes helping people see that look at all of what you've achieved, look at all that you've accomplished in your life, and help them realize that, yeah, I have done a lot of good. I have made a difference. And that will help someone find a little bit more peace as they stare at their own mortality, their own existence. There's a Japanese movie called Ikiru about a businessman who's given just a few weeks to live, and so he races to the bank and he withdraws tens and tens of thousands of dollars, and he blows it all in fast living in Tokyo nightclubs, and he still feels completely empty inside. He doesn't feel like anything he's ever done has made a difference. And he remembers there's this lady that quit his company to go work at a toy factory, and he could never understand why she did that. She always seemed so happy and seemed like she always had a smile on her face. And so he found her and he said, why did you leave my company? And how are you always so happy? And she said, I just think of the little boy and little girl's face that will receive this toy when I make it for them and how happy they will be. And it makes me feel good that I'm doing something that will bring a smile to that boy's face or that girl's face. That's what rippling is all about, helping people see that they can do little things to make a great big ripple and make a great big legacy for themselves. Helping people to reflect, realizing things like philosophy, spiritual writings, poems, all have the power to kind of unlock something within our consciousness. Nietzsche wrote that when we are tired, we are attacked by ideas that we conquered long ago. Maybe you tackled a fear of death, a fear of meaningless living years and years ago. But if you hit a season in life that's wearing you down and things are extra stressful and you're not getting enough sleep and you're not connecting with people that bring you life, it's going to happen that you're going to get attacked by ideas and attacked by things that you may have already solved long ago. So you don't need to resolve the puzzle. You just need to remember that snapshot of the puzzle being completed already. And you don't need to go back and reconquer those struggles. It's not just a saying that your mother told you. It's not just a chorus in a popular song, but what doesn't kill you does make you stronger. That's another philosophical reflection that is attributed to Nietzsche. And some refuse the loan of life to avoid the debt of death. So some people just completely refuse to live this gift of life because they're afraid of death. And so sometimes we just need to reflect upon that. Do I really want to refuse this gift I've been given? I've only been given a short amount of time. Maybe I've been given 60, 70 years. You never know. Maybe you've only been given 30 years. But don't live in a way that avoids the debt of death. Debt of death will come for us all. So how do we live in a way to avoid those regrets and live with the most purpose and clarity? And finally, it takes connection. We must choose connection instead of choosing to live in denial, diversion, and displacement because we're afraid to look at our own death aversion. We're afraid to look at our own mortality. We don't put on a pair of eclipse glasses to look deep and long at it, so we decide to deny, divert, and displace, much like Scrooge did. And we don't tackle the ultimate existential loneliness, this unbridged gap between us and other people. There's a great chasm of loneliness in our world. And that is a root cause as well of unhinging a lot of this fear. And it can be a source of strength and support and healing. And so one of the best things you can do, besides helping someone look at rippling, helping someone reflect deeply on these meditations, these sayings, is to also connect, to relate well with someone, to listen well to someone, to validate their story, and to realize that they're struggling with something of a loss of identity, a loss of the world that they've created, especially if they're facing one of those awakening events like a cancer diagnosis. It can really mess with your inner well-being. So we have to be aware of that and help people through that. So here's some tools for human connection. Empathy, Yalom says, is the greatest tool. I feel your pain with you. I'm here with you in this moment. I may or may not understand exactly what it's like to be in your shoes, but I'm here to walk with you in your shoes. That's empathy. Presence, Yalom, even though he's got a MD and taught psychiatry and trained young psychiatrists for decades and decades, he still makes sure that he focuses on this as one of his primary goals, is to be presently engaged with the person who's sharing their feelings in that moment. And he makes sure that he holds that space for them. He tunes in. He won't let the person just kind of drift into a joking sense that might take them off track, but he continues to hold someone close and hold them into that moment and continue to remind them of why they're there and what they need to tune into. And he offers them his heart. He shares his feelings in that moment, and he uses a lot of silence. Silence is always a wonderful tool with someone who's really needing to explore the depths of their trials and their troubles and their potential anxieties. Yalom also talks about a gratitude visit based upon a positive psychologist founder Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman would say that we ought to all think of at least one person in our life right now that's still alive who we are very grateful for, who we are so grateful that they're in our life. They literally rippled a giant ripple of love into us, or a giant ripple of influence our way. So we need to write them a letter. We need to say how much we appreciate them and how grateful we are for them and what a difference their life has made in our life. And then we need to meet with that person and read that letter to them. And so that's another way to battle the unlived life. So much of our anxiety and our worry is, oh, I haven't lived life yet. How could I be facing death when I never chose to live? as this helps battle the unlived life. Yalom says that the way to value life, the way to feel compassion for others, the way to love anything with greatest depth is to be aware that these experiences are destined to be lost. To value life, to build our compassion, to feel that compassionate care and presence for others, is to realize that these experiences are destined to be lost. Not just a soap opera, it's not just a cliche, but we truly just have this one life, this one moment to step in and walk alongside of someone who might literally be scared to death. And we can provide them our presence, we can provide them our companionship, we can provide them our listening ear. We can ask the hard questions, and we can be patient and wait for them to be able to get back to us with a response. But it begins with you and it begins with me. Each of us has to get in touch with our own personal awakening. What experiences in your life could serve you well in terms of understanding what it's like to connect to a person who's going through this scared to death moment, this anxiety, whether it's on the surface or just below the surface? What have been your awakening experience? When have you felt most aware of your mortality? Was it a cancer diagnosis? Was it a car accident? Was it the death of your parents? The unexpected death of a sibling? What was that? And have you shared that story with people that you're connected with? Have you shared that story with other people who might be struggling so that they can benefit from your heart being open to them? Ultimately, it takes practice. It takes looking at the compass and trying to figure out, okay, which way do I go from here? As this person is sharing with me, as I begin to see that this person might be struggling with some of these anxieties. We always want to start with our presence. We always want to start with our care. We always want to start with our unconditional positive regard for this person and accept them right there in that moment, exactly where they're at, without any expectation, without any agenda, to move them forward until they're ready to move. And so here are some resources. If what we've shared today in this training has sparked something in you and you want to look further into this death anxiety or existential anxiety, maybe this as a mental health professional or as a healthcare worker or a person in ministry in the clergy or nonprofit world, maybe you've never heard of these. Maybe you've never heard of Dr. Yalom. There's 3 books here I put on the resource list: Staring at the Sun, Love's Executioner, and Mama and the Meaning of Life. Dr. Yalom takes a lot of true-to-life client stories and he integrates them well into each of his books. The Death of Ivan Ilyich, a classic novella by Leo Tolstoy, is another great resource to see someone who wrestles with their own mortality, wrestles with what it means to be alive and yet be so close to dying. And there's a young man named Gerasim that comes along and companions Ivan through his terminal days. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And then for me personally, in the ministerial world or the counseling world, the healthcare world I've intersected with the last 12 years, here are 3 books that just keep coming back for me. Connecting by Dr. Larry Crabb, The Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen, and Companioning the Bereaved by Dr. Alan Wolfelt. All wonderful pieces, all of different shapes and sizes and flavors, but many of this has sparked an interest in going further. I just strongly encourage you to take a look at these resources. Remember, we can look at the sunset of the soul. We can stare at the sun and overcome the terror of death if we put on our eclipse glasses, if we get in there with someone, walk alongside of someone, give them a set of glasses and say, let's look at this. Let's look at truly what you're afraid of. What is it about this that you're afraid of? Do you know how much of an influence you've had in so many people's lives? Can you tell me an example of a time when you rippled into someone, or a time when someone you least expected came up to you and thanked you for what you meant to them? walking alongside someone and doing it with them, each of you choosing to do a gratitude letter to someone who has made a difference, someone whose life has rippled into yours and touched you in a positive and powerful way. I'd strongly encourage you to take advantage of these opportunities. And if you haven't yet, there will be information on how to subscribe to my Hope Connection, where you'll get the note slides for this presentation. You'll get other resources on caring for people, on advancing hope in this hopeless world. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today for this Soul Series webinar, Sunset of the Soul, Overcoming the Terror of Death.